Okay guys, we're going to start our geometry curriculum with lesson 1-1, and the topic here is points, lines, and planes. Now, points, lines, and planes, they're basic undefined terms that are the building blocks of Euclidean geometry. Now, when you hear that word Euclidean geometry, that just means geometry in one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or three-dimensional space. There are other types of geometry, believe it or not, that you will study if you major in math when you go to college. Okay, but right now we're just worried about Euclidean geometry. Now, here's some characteristics of points, lines, and planes. Number one, they have no size, so they take up no space and they're invisible. All right, so based on that, you might be asking yourself, okay, what are they? They have no size, they take up no space, and they're invisible. Well, we've got two basic objectives we want to accomplish with this lesson. Number one, we want to have a good understanding of what points, lines, and planes are. And number two, we want to make sure that we know how to correctly use the notation and how to name correctly points, lines, planes, segments, and rays. So we've got a chart here, and it's three columns. The first column is the name of the object. Second column is how it's drawn. Okay, and then the third column is going to be the notation for it. So we're going to go through the notation for each one of these objects, and then when we're done talking about the notation, okay, then we'll go through and tie it all back together based on this statement. All right, so let's talk about a point. Okay, so a point. So here's how we draw a point in geometry. It's drawn by a dot, and it's labeled with a capital letter. So the notation for naming a point would be just to write that capital letter of the point. So now I can look at this and say this is point A. By the way, when you read these objects, you say the name of the object, and then you say the letter or letters of the object. That is point A, all right? And then that's how you would write it, okay? A line. So a line is an object that extends indefinitely, meaning it keeps going in two directions. Okay, so this is how a line is drawn. Okay, you draw it, and then you put an arrow on each end to signify that the line continues without end. Now, the way how you name a line in geometry is you use 2 points that are labeled on the line. You use 2 points that are labeled on the line. So for example, if I have point A labeled here and point B labeled here, 2 is all I need. And then, so now I can name that line as line AB. So I'll use the letters, and then notice what else you do for the notation. Okay, you must put the line symbol above those 2 letters. Okay, so again, to name a line, you use 2 points that are labeled on the line. The letters of 2 points that are labeled on the line. Now, when you're naming a line, it doesn't matter which point you use first. If I wanted to reverse this and call this line BA, that's just fine. That's the same line. There are 2 ways to name the line that we have drawn here. All right? There is some exceptions with lines that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Okay? For a plane. So a plane is drawn using this representation. Now, in a plane, okay, a plane is really a 2-dimensional figure that extends indefinitely in many directions. A line just keeps going forever in 2 directions. A plane keeps going forever in many directions. All right? And so this is kind of the drawing that we use to represent a plane. Now, when you go to name a plane, it takes 3 points that are labeled on the plane. You use the letters of 3 points that are labeled on the plane. Now there's no symbol for plane, so you just write the word out. Plane. And then you must use 3 letters that are labeled on the plane. In this case, we can call it plane A, B, C. All right? Now, just like the notation for line, you can take these letters in any order. So the order of the letters does not matter. Plane ABC, BCA, CAB, BCA, and there are many other combinations and orders of letters that you can use here and be correct. The order is not important. Now, there's a word I want you to write out to the side of this called non-collinear. We're going to talk about what that means here in just a moment. Okay, but for now, I just want you to write it off to the side, and then we'll come back later and talk about what it means. All right? The next object we're going to learn how to name is segment. Now, a segment is a piece of a line. It's part of a line. A line keeps going in both directions. A segment has two endpoints. Okay? And to name a segment, you use the letters of the two ending points. So I can call this segment AB. All right? And we also must put the segment symbol over the top of it. The segment symbol is just a bar without the arrows on the end. So if you have the arrows, that's the line symbol. If you just have a bar, that's the segment symbol. Just like a line, it can be reversed. BA. So there are two ways to name this particular segment. Either one would be correct. All right? Now let's talk about array. Array has a starting point, and then it extends forever in just one direction. So array kind of behaves like a line on one end, and it behaves like a segment on the other end. So to name array, you must start with the starting point of the ray. All right? So let's look here and see if we can figure out what's the starting point of the ray. Well, the ray starts from point A. So I'm going to start by writing point A first. The second letter that you use to name the ray has to be a point that the ray is traveling in. So the ray starts at point A, but then it travels through point B. So the second letter I'm going to use is point B. Now, we must put the ray symbol above it. And the ray symbol just has the arrow on the right-hand side. The arrow must be on the right-hand side. Okay? Can't be on the other side. Now, unlike segment and line and plane, you can't just put the letters in any order. So I cannot reverse this and call it ray BA. That would not be correct, and here's why. Remember, to name a ray, you must have the first letter be the starting point of the ray. So if I said, look at ray BA, then that would be the ray that starts here and goes the other direction. That's a different ray. All right? That's a different ray. Okay. So now, let's just stop here now that we've talked about how to name each one of these things and kind of point out a couple of different things. Okay, so number one, make sure that you know how to correctly pronounce these things. So what you do when you go to name the object, because sometimes in geometry you'll have the picture, but sometimes you'll only have the name of the object. So you need to know how to properly name it when you go to read it. You will say the name of the object, then you say the letters. If I were naming this point, I would call it point A. If I were naming this line, I would call it line AB. How do I know it's a line? If I didn't have the picture, because of the line symbol. I would call this plane ABC, ray AB, or excuse me, this is segment AB. This is ray AB, all right? So remember, when you're naming these things, when you're reading them, you will say the object, then you will say the letters. Okay, now, notice that 3 of these are named with 2 letters. So now you can see why it's important to use the right symbol. If you don't use the right symbol, we don't know which object you're talking about. If you just say AB, look at AB, and or if you just write AB and you don't put the symbol, I don't know if you're talking about line AB, segment AB, or ray AB. All right, so keep that in mind. The symbol, or in the case of plane, writing the word plane, is very important as far as the notation is concerned. As a matter of fact, if you don't put the right symbol, it's not correct when you go to name the object. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, make sure you notice how many letters we've used. Okay, a point. You use 1 letter to name a point. There is no point AB. Okay, it's point A, point B, point C, and so on. You use 2 letters to name a line. Okay, so there's no, you wouldn't write, if there was another point that was labeled on this line, you wouldn't call it line ABC. Okay, that's not correct. 2 letters is all you need, regardless of how many points are labeled on the line. Okay, now line has a few extenuating circumstances we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But generally speaking, 2 letters to name a line. So if you're asked to name a line, if that's the question, name the line that does this, and you put an answer of ABC, line ABC, I know that there's no way that that can be correct. You need 2 letters, okay? And with plane, you need 3 letters, okay? If the question says name a plane that does this or that, and you write plane AB, not correct. If you write plane ABCD, still not correct. It doesn't matter how many points are labeled. There could be 10 points labeled on the plane. You only take 3, all right? Segment, same thing. 2 letters. There's no such thing as segment A or segment ABC. Same thing with ray. Make sure that you're using the correct number of letters, and that's why I've given you this chart, so that when you go and answer some of these questions, you can look back at the chart kind of as a guide to help you. All right, now, we said there are a few special cases with line. Let's talk about that now. Let's say that we have a line that's drawn and more than 2 points are labeled on the line. If that's the case, then you have your choice as to which 2 letters to pick. So if I have more than 2, I can pick any 2. So I can call this line AB. That would be correct. I could call it line, what, BC. That would be correct. I could call it line CA. Then I could reverse all of those. AC. Because remember, the order doesn't matter. For line. Line BA. And there's one more, line CB. All right? So all of those would be a correct way to name this line. And if you have a question that says name this line, all you have to do is pick one of them. They would all be correct. Okay? Another special case, occasionally you will have no points that are labeled on the line. No points that are labeled on the line. If that's the case, then many times the diagram will have a lowercase script letter at the end of one of the arrows, and you will use that letter to name the line. Okay? So, like, for instance, here you would call this line L. Okay? Line L. And in this case, you don't use the line symbol, you just write out the word line. The line symbol is reserved for the point notation for line. If you just have a script letter out beside it, because there are no points labeled on the line, then you write out the word line, and then you use the script letter. All right, so those are a few of the special cases when we're talking about labeling lines. All right? Now, here's something else that I want to go back and tie together. Now that we know how to name all these objects, let's go back to this statement. They have no size, they take up no space, and they're invisible. Well, Coach, I see the point. It's right there. Now, remember, the drawing, that dot is not the point. That dot is what we drew to represent the point. Because the actual point has no size, it takes up no space, and it's invisible. Okay? What a point really is a location in space. It's a location, right? So a location typically doesn't really have any size. I mean, so like if I move just a tiny fraction, that's actually a different location. All right? So keep that in mind. Okay, so the thing to remember is the way we draw these objects is not the object itself. Okay? It's just the drawing is the representation we use, okay, so that we can talk about it and see it and look at it. All right? So this dot, okay, is not the point. Okay? It's just the representation we use for the point itself. Okay? And remember, another thing to remember about points, lines, and planes is just because it's not drawn doesn't mean it's not there. In other words, this point was here before I drew it and labeled it. This line was here before I drew it and labeled it. This plane, segment, and so on. So think about it like this. There are points, lines, and planes everywhere, all over the place. Infinitely many of them everywhere. Okay, so like for example, here's a question that I like to ask to kind of get you to understand this point. Okay? All right, I've drawn a circle here. Here's the question. How many points are inside this circle? Okay? So think about that for just a minute. How many points are inside this circle? Well, there's a point here, there's a point here, and 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 a point here. So what do you think? 20, 50, 100, 1,000? Is there more than that? Well, what if I do it so much that I fill up the whole circle? Well, here's the thing. How can you fill up the circle with something that has no size? Because remember, if I were to zoom in on one of these dots that I've drawn, if I were to zoom in on it, there's a whole bunch of points on that dot that I've drawn, all right? So, to correctly answer this question, how many points are there inside this circle? There are infinitely many, more than can possibly be numbered. Same thing if I ask, well, how many points are on this dot that I've drawn? The same thing, infinitely many, because as soon as you move just a minute amount of space, then you have a different point, a new point. All right? So keep that in mind. So here's the thing to remember. There are infinitely many points, lines, and planes everywhere, all over the place. All right? and remember, the point, line, and plane was there before we drew it. Just because it's not drawn doesn't mean it's not there. Like for example, there's a line on this paper going this way. There's a line on this paper going this way. There's a line on this paper going this way, 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 this way. You see what I mean? Okay. Also, I could take the line and turn it up toward you. That's another line. Or go out this way. Or as soon as I angle it different, that's a different line. They're all over the place. So there's infinitely, same thing with planes. There's planes shooting everywhere, all over the place. Okay, so there's infinitely many points, lines, and planes all over the place. And just because it's not drawn doesn't mean it's not there. Okay, so here's another thing that I want you to kind of think about. Okay, it takes a minimum of 2 points to determine a line. All right. So, and we'll get to that here in just a minute as well. I want to hold that thought for just a minute. Okay? I've got 2 vocabulary words I want to show you. Okay, so number 1 is collinear. We've talked about that. We wrote that down on the other page. Collinear means on the same line. If it's on the same line, then it's collinear. Okay? So, for example, these 3 points right here, they're on the same line, so they're collinear, right? And remember, if I draw 3 lines like this, or 3 points like this, they are also collinear. Okay? Remember, what line are they on? Well, I don't see a line. Well, of course you don't, because lines are invisible. But is there a line that I can draw through all 3 of these points? Yes. If they are all lined up, if the 3 points are lined up, that's collinear. Here's an example of non-collinear. There is no line that I can use to draw through all 3 points of these at the same time. Non-collinear. Collinear on the same line, non-collinear not on the same line. And likewise, another word, coplanar, on the same plane. And then, of course, non-coplanar would be not on the same plane. All right, so these 4 are coplanar. They're on the same plane. However, if I have these 3 and then the 4th dot is up in the air above it like this, that's non-coplanar. They are not in the same plane. Not in the same plane. All right? All right, so let's talk about practicing. Well, let me go back to this page for just a minute. So remember with plane, we said that the points have to be non-collinear. So in order to name a plane, you must use 3 points that are non-collinear. Non-collinear. Okay, they do not lie in the same plane. Okay? Or excuse me, they do not lie on the same line. Okay? And here's kind of the reason. Let's talk about a line. If you have 2 points on the line, that's enough to figure out where the line is. Like for example, if I say, okay, I have an invisible line on here I want you to find. Here's 1 point on the line. Do you know where the line is yet? No, because it can be turned like this, it can be turned like this, it can be turned like this. You don't know where the line is yet. But if I say, okay, here's another point on the line. Do you know where it is now? Yes, you know right where the line is. Okay, so that's why a line is named with 2 points. Because once you know 2 points on the line, you know exactly where the line is. All right? You don't need any more than 2. And with a plane, it takes 3 non-collinear points to determine a plane, to know where the plane is. All right? So if you have 3 points on the plane, and that's all you have, then you know exactly where the plane is. It's the plane that goes through those 3 points. Okay? And so just to kind of give you some 3D representation of these different things, okay, like a, let's see, just kind of looking around the room here to find some things. Like a wall, that would be a representation of a plane, or the floor would be a representation of a plane, or a sheet of paper would be a representation of a plane, right? And of course, like a railing would be a representation of a line, and a button would be a representation of a point, just to kind of give you some ideas, all right? Okay, let's go back to this. All right, so now we're going to actually practice naming the object. So this is similar to the type of questions that your assignment is going to have. Okay, so let's say we wanted to name this object. First of all, identify what kind of object it is. So is this object a point, a line, a plane, a segment, or array? Well, this line or this object is a line. Okay, so how do we name a line? We name a line with 2 points that are on the line. Well, how many points are labeled on the line? There are 3 that are labeled on the line. Okay, so I can take any 2. So if I wanted to, I could name this line MP. Line MP. Remember, make sure you put the line symbol above it or it's not correct. Okay? Line MP. Line MP. Okay? All right. Let's see. What else we got here? By the way, that's not the only correct answer. You could also call this line PQ, line QM, line PM, and so on. Now, notice I said 3 points that are labeled on the line. There are more than 3 points on the line. There are only 3 points that are labeled on the line. Because there's a point here, 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 here. So hopefully you get the idea. Okay, so there's 3 points labeled on the line, but there are more than 3 points on this line. Okay? Next object. What is it? Identify it first. This is a segment. How do we name a segment? With 2 letters of the endpoints. The endpoints are DE, and then I will make sure I put my segment symbol above the letters. The correct way to name this object is segment DE. Okay? All right, segment, the next thing that we come to. All right, let's identify this object. This object is array. Okay, remember, how do we name array? Okay, we start with the starting point of the ray. So what's the starting point of the ray? Point E or point F? Okay, the starting point of the ray is point F. It starts here. So F has got to come first. What's the point that the ray is traveling towards? It's traveling through point E. So this is ray FE. Remember, that cannot be reversed, because if you say ray EF, that's the ray that starts here and then goes this way. That's a different ray. Okay? It's a different ray. All right, let's identify the last object. It is a plane. So I know the answer for the way you name the object is plane something. All right? Plane something. Now, remember, I need 3 letters, but I need my 3 letters to be what? Non-collinear. That means not on the same line. They cannot be lined up. The 3 letters that I choose cannot be lined up. So the 3 letters that I cannot choose here is T, E, J. I cannot choose those 3 letters. I can choose any other combination, but not those 3. Okay, so I can call it plane TMJ. And that's just one answer. I could call it JM. T, M, J, T, T, E, M, M, E, J, J, E, M, E, T, M. You get the idea? I just can't use it. I just cannot call it T, E, J, because those 3 are in a line. All right, so hopefully that gives you some ideas on the correct way to name these objects. Keep these notes handy and remember what we talked about so that you can go back and you can work out your quiz that is in Canvas over this section. All right, next time we'll be talking about lesson 1.2.